everybody. Welcome to RevOps Bites. I'm Kathryn. I'm the founder of Candybox. And joining me today is Max Pazevic. I hope I pronounced that decently enough.
Nailed it.
Max is going to be joining us to talk about all things RevOps. Max, thank you so much for taking some time today.
Thank you very much, Kathryn. It's a pleasure to be here.
The pleasure is mutual. Okay, so we can jump right into things. I'm sure for people listening, they would love to know a little bit about you. What do you do? What has your role been like in the RevOps ecosystem so far? Did you get into RevOps deliberately, or was it more of a happy accident?
That's a great question. I think the last part is probably the piece that like most revenue operations people are most familiar with, which is the, most of us, I feel like, fall into this position, and I am no different than any of those people. Like, I first started out of more financial desperation, let's just say, like just getting started in the data operations space, seeing like what I could do and how I could apply my degree. And so I started off in like data operations, which I feel like is like revenue operations adjacent, or like some revenue operations people would do it. But like I pretty much automated myself out of the job at first. And like one of my managers and this is like a long time ago now, like Apartment List, but one of my managers noticed that I automated myself out of a job and then I was only working for like 2 hours a day, and said like, hey, like, why don't you apply some of those automations like in the revenue operations domain? Like, we have a bunch of Salesforce processes that like we think that your automations could actually apply to. So like, why don't you just go and work on those for us? And, like 10 years later, like that's how I ended up like sort of just doing that for the rest of my career. In some capacity, I've just been working with GTM systems and tools like at every company that I've been at, whether that's like Apartment List or like Rippling earlier, or now like as a growth operations lead at Omni. I feel like while we wear many hats and revenue operations is the jack of all trades of jack of all trades, like I truly am like the jack of all trades of the jack of all trades, like I have really done like post-sales, pre-sales, systems, revenue accounting, whatever you can possibly name in the revenue system. Like I have touched or seen in some capacity. Not to say I'm like omniscient or something, because I'm certainly not. I have a lot to learn, and I don't want to come off as knowing everything, because I don't.
What I'm getting from this is that I can ask you any question and you're going to have a great answer right off the bat for it.
I was like, I'll have like some answer for you. It's like asking a Swiss Army knife to do like the job of a knife. It's like, I'll definitely, do it, but not as capably as someone who's specialized in like the knife trade. You know what I mean?
I think that is an analogy that a lot of us in RevOps and GTM can relate to. We're more often than not tasked with being all things to all people and sort of operating out of necessity, which, I don't know, I think it's part of the fun of the space, to be honest.
That's why I got into it too. So there's definitely a large part that I enjoy, and hope I didn't make it sound like it's a burden or something. No,
definitely not. So I think something that's interesting about your career, at least to me, is you've worked in a lot of startups and sort of high growth companies. I'm really curious to hear more about that experience. What, I guess, some of the differences you've noticed in RevOps and GTM in that type of environment versus, say, a more steady growth company or a more mature company.
Yeah, I think I am kind of addicted to sort of like the flow of fast, like high growth companies. Like I definitely love the speed of adoption for new tools. Like I've just always been attracted to like this sort of like fast moving, high performance, like go as quickly as possible, try as many new things as possible approach. Like I have very much seen that like sort of in my job as I've developed over the years. The different companies that I've worked at have all been like that. There has never been one that I've like functioned within that isn't just chock full like smart people trying new things all the time. Like, and that is what I've sort of found so addictive about that environment. There's like an energy in the room whenever I walk in. I'm never just laying on my hands and just like watching leads come in or something like that. And, hey, my router worked or something like that. I'm always optimizing, always fixing, always cleaning, like always finding new tools to do those jobs as well. And I think you can only really get that and get like from a hands-on perspective, like at these small high growth companies. If you're working at something like, or like a larger company, I think a lot of the times you're locked into a system that someone defined for you. Like someone has made something or some tooling and you're editing that in and of itself. But if you're working at a high growth company, you have the opportunity to implement tools sort of like on your schedule and from your point of view. And I think it's like the best learning opportunity available. And I'm still learning, so I'm still in high growth companies, and here we are.
Yeah, great. I'm curious, have you ever seen an instance where growth was almost happening too fast for the RevOps or GTM? I think the answer might be yes. For the GTM infrastructure to keep up, and if so, what happened? Obviously, you don't need to give specifics if you're not at liberty, but what happened? What were you able to learn from it?
No, of course. I think that has basically happened at every single company that I have worked at. So it almost, like, I do my absolute best to be like as proactive as humanly possible, right? Like, I don't think you want to ever get to the point where you're like, we should have switched 3 months ago. But like, you kind of inevitably do in some cases. Like when you are focused on one thing, like another blows up, for example. Like, I can talk about a recent project that I'm literally working on like right now, as we speak. It's like, well, we have like this active campaign sync. It's like leads come in, but for whatever reason, it's busted, like some leads just don't show up. And all of a sudden we have to like migrate off of this system, and I have to like change everything into like HubSpot's infrastructure. That wasn't like premeditated or anything. That's like an on the spot, like, we have to change this. Like, you've got 2 weeks to fix it, like go to town and like switch it over to this new system in its entirety. It's one thing to like make that command and another to actually implement something like that. And I feel like as soon as I'm done implementing this, there's going to be another thing that sort of like detonates in my face, right? Like in the background, that's just been running and silently failing and just waiting for someone to uncover it and actually like, voice it to me. Mm-hmm. And then it'll be on to the next one. So I don't know if I've ever been overwhelmed in that sense, but like I have definitely felt the like something is constantly broken, mentality, but that's sort of the fun part too. There's always a thing where you're like fixing or looking or searching to create.
It made me think, because I'm very familiar with that kind of situation as well, so I know exactly what you're talking about. How do you think you balance, like the need to make a quick decision and be able to pivot with, making sure that you're not unintentionally putting in a stopgap solution that's just going to create technical debt down the line? Like, how do you try to make the best possible decision given the time constraints that we're inevitably operating under?
Totally. And that's a really good question too. I think I almost inevitably, not even by my own choice, go for like the solution that fixes it immediately, right? Like, I think solving it quickly is almost certainly better in every instance. And I have definitely failed in this way, okay? Like, solving it very quickly is almost better than like waiting for the perfect solution, because the perfect solution almost never is. Like, once you get to the end and you actually release something into the wild, like, as I'm sure like any revenue operations professional would know, it's like that's exactly when the people come in and start dogging the effort, as though like all of these training documents and post-releases or pre-releases just didn't matter at all. So yeah, I think it's just, you gotta be prepared.
Yeah. So I guess it sounds like you see the best success when you essentially get a V1 in place as soon as possible that actually fixes the issue, even if it's, not a perfect solution, even if you need to iterate upon it.
Yes, and then you, like, basically have to go in with the mindset that, like, I am going to fix this later. Like, you can't just say, like, oh, I'm gonna leave it, and, like, that's it. I think, like, writing technical documentation actually helps, like, immensely in that regard. If you actually, like, write down what you did and write down what you implemented, and, like, AI now can, like, very much help in this capacity, then you have like a much better idea of like, oh yeah, I implemented that really poorly. Like, I need to go back and actually change that so it's much more effective, right? So that's always been the strategy, and that has been dominant, shall we say. Like, I almost never go back. It's like, make like the thing that works, and then like intentionally know that you're going to go back and iterate on it in the downtime that you have between the project, if that downtime exists, because it can compound.
Makes sense. So the documentation angle, I think most people don't like creating documentation. I honestly think that if I had to guess, the majority of people just don't really do it unless they're forced to. So I'm curious, how have you built that muscle? How have you got into the habit of creating documentation? What are some tips and tricks for people who know that they should be doing it, but maybe just aren't as much as they should be?
No, 100%. Like, this one, I admittedly would have mentioned in like my weaknesses category, you know, for like anything that anyone asked me. But I think like artificial intelligence, specifically just talking to like ChatGPT and using it sort of like as a project partner as you're iterating through things, like even if you know the answer, giving it the context that it can reference through memory at the end of a project. So if you're going through and iterating through issues and being like, hey, this is what I implemented, like as you're doing it, like, is this a solid approach? Like, that gives you like a nice perspective, like from an outside, even if that entity might not be correct all the time, you know, you have to double check it, but it is like an outside perspective. But it also allows you to just like keep iterating through with the goal of eventually saying, okay, now that you know everything about this project, right, like summarize this for me, like give me the synopsis from your point of view, you know, and you're explaining this to someone else. And like that documentation is not always perfect because like memory degrades over time for like a lot of these models, at least like right now. But I find that isn't even me writing most of the documentation, and that is like way more than sufficient. It's better than like a lot of solutions out there. So if you get 80% of the way just doing that, like writing the last 20% is much more of a surmountable task, and it doesn't feel as imposing.
It's kind of like what you were saying about putting in place like a solution that gets at least some of the way there rather than waiting for the perfect solution. Or it seems kind of like a similar thing, you know, even if what you get out of ChatGPT or whatever you're using is only 80% of what you're looking for, is still 80% more than doing nothing.
Than writing. Like, I find that like looking at a blank page is like the one thing that inhibits me on like most projects that I work on, right? If I'm just looking at a blank flow or I'm looking at a blank page for documentation, I'm extraordinarily intimidated. Even if the work is like poor that like an AI system outputs, like I find it so much easier for me to jump in, and I imagine this is true for other people as well, and just say like, you know, I'm going to correct that output, and I'm going to be like, you know, I'm actually going to get to work on it. And it just helps me start, you know, and actually record those things in the end. It's much less of an imposing task.
It's true, isn't it? It's like if you've got a badly built Salesforce flow and you're going in and you're tasked with fixing it, it is a lot easier than just creating that blank template. And you're like, now I have to think about where I would start, all of the decision criteria. But even if you have just a really bad base, it gives you something to work off of. It is
100%. 100%. And chat is like the undisputed king of like putting something on paper, right? You know, like that's it. And I find that that's enough to get me started most times. Super helpful. I'd say like that in and of itself is already like boosted, like at least my post-project releases, you know, saying like, hey, this is what I did, this is what I implemented, this is what you should see. Just having an entity that can summarize that at the end has been like a game changer for me, for sure.
Yeah. So since we got onto the topic naturally, I know that everybody's probably sick of talking about it by now, but AI, I'm curious, are there any actual trends that you're seeing in your day-to-day work, or, you know, from people in your network where AI is actually being utilized to, you know, automate or augment workflows? If so, I would love to hear about some of the use cases you've seen, some of the tools that are actually making an impact versus just, you know, generating a lot of discussion on LinkedIn.
Totally. I think my opinion is that most people, including myself, are like sort of in an experimentation phase. I think like best practices is sort of like a misnomer for artificial intelligence because like no one really knows like what the best practice is, you know. Even for prompting, for example, if you're just talking to ChatGPT daily, I see like one article that says like, here's how you should structure your prompts. And then like the one beneath it is like, here's how you should structure your prompts in this case. You know, it's like, I guess there are use cases for prompts now that I need to structure them differently in. I think we're like all figuring out like what tools are most useful. And so in that regard, I don't have like tools where I'm like, this is like going to be a home run for you 100%, unless it's like Fathom. Actually, I'm going to shout out Fathom. Fathom is a great meeting recorder. Like that tool in particular is a game changer. Like it has excellent like follow-ups and next steps, and I found that to be extremely useful. But aside from that, in terms of like an actual operating capacity, like there are a few tools that I do think are interesting, and like, you know, I think Vector's a cool one, like for actually seeing leads that actually like that come into your site and having like a clear pipeline for that. But I don't think I have any tools where I'm saying like this is the one that I'm recommending to my friends except for Fathom. Aside from Fathom, everything else, like I really don't think I have like a concise tool list or something that I would recommend to someone just yet. Like there are use cases and I'm happy to like delve into them if you want, but I am not confident saying that what I'm doing or how I'm utilizing AI is like best practice yet.
I think that's so fair. Okay, so circling back a bit to the, you know, this recurring pattern through your career with the fast-paced environments, what would you say to somebody who's maybe considering taking a similar career path? What do you think maybe the pros and cons of that type of environment, and what kind of skills do you think have been maybe unexpectedly beneficial?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with the end, like unexpectedly beneficial skills. I guess like adaptability is something that I never associated with a long-term, like 9 to 5, you know, like when I was first starting out, I never thought like, oh, well, your ability to like pick up tools or like learn things, you know, that sounds like generic advice, but when you're doing it in our role specifically, like I feel like you are learning a new tool, a new system, a new integration, a new, you know, way to use said integration, feature rollouts that come from the tools that you're using, you know, and then implementing them in a completely new way. You're learning and inputting so many things so consistently that like learning to learn is probably the most important skill that I've like developed in like my revenue operations career. And I would say that anyone who's looking to get into revenue operations probably needs to be a good learner, you know, someone who is good at learning. So if you find yourself like picking things up quickly, like I think anyone can really adapt to this career path because it is just like a jack of all trades. I don't think you have to go so in depth. You definitely can into like systems, but you do need to have a good idea of how those systems that you're creating sort of play with one another so that you have like an idea of how like the orchestra comes together. And that just requires like learning what a guitar sounds like, learning what the oboe sounds like, you know, learning like what this sounds like. And if you're listening to like a huge variety of music and picking up on each instrument, you know, like usually that a lot of people can find that overwhelming. So I always found that like to be the best part of revenue operations, like learning all those different tools and skills has been great. It makes me feel like I can do anything, even though I definitely can't, you know. Like, so
I think over time it builds your confidence, because you'll come up against yet another tool or a use case that maybe you haven't seen before, and you know, early on maybe you'll think, and you're getting intimidated, like, I'm not sure what I'm doing, and you'll sort of fail forwards, as it were. But you get to a certain point where, like, I've seen hundreds of different tools, hundreds of different use cases. Even if I haven't seen this one, I've got this. I'm going to figure it out, no problem.
That is it. Like, you hit the nail on the head. It's really just, like, being comfortable with being uncomfortable, too. Maybe that is just cliche advice, but that really is, like, epitomized by revenue operations, truly. Like, I've never seen or been in another function where you're just taking in as many tools, like, or as many changes to those tools. It's like on a daily basis. Perhaps like engineering experiences something similar, but man, it's definitely something to look out for if you're getting started in the field. It's just being aware of like the tools that are actually out there and that people are using, because they're changing constantly. Like, it presents a good opportunity for you yourself to get ahead of the game and sort of anticipate like where it's going if you understand like the orchestra itself.
Yeah.
So,
well, I guess as a follow-up to that, what are your, I mean, outside of just your day-to-day work, what are your favorite or most effective ways of staying up to date with trends, changes, new tools, kind of experimenting with things? Or do you find it just comes about.
Oh man, yeah. I was gonna say it's like probably such a nothing burger answer. It's like it kind of just happens. It happens to me, like that's not very helpful advice to say like, yeah, my friend will send me an article and like I get this stream, or like HubSpot will have like a feature, email. I'm like definitely synced up to every feature email for every tool that I use, and I definitely experiment with it like the second it's released. Like that applies to basically everything that I use. Like I'm probably, like in the technological adoption thing, like I'm at the like extreme enthusiast, side of the scale, I try things out. Like if it's got like a couple of people and some like obscure guy in Switzerland, like sure, I'll give your tool a try, I'm always curious I think curiosity is definitely the most important factor, not really like anything in particular that I look at.
Yeah. Two things that I did here, though, are like having a network. It's like cultivating that circle of people who are going to send you strange and interesting articles about tools with 3 users from Switzerland. Also, gosh, what was the other thing? Yeah, signing up to like product updates, newsletters, things like that, so that you are getting, exposed to that information and you kind of have your own personalized newsfeed, as it were. So
definitely. I'd say that's extraordinarily helpful. There are, like, if I get, sometimes I'll just get, like, obsessed with a tool and look for similar tools. Like, if, like, Fathom is there, I'm like, Fathom competitors, like, that's one of the, like, what other tools are out there? Like, this can't possibly be the best, like, where's the Switzerland guy's version of, like, Fathom, like, can I improve upon it? Like, where's, like, the newest design for this thing? It sort of helps you, like, keep up to date with where it's going as well.
Oh, yeah. This is kind of an aside, but I don't know if you saw, it was a couple months ago, a lady did this super in-depth comparison of like all Fathom related tools with like an analysis of all the core modes, and it was like an entire scientific study. I was like, I love RevOps when I read that.
Yeah, it's like, that's the exact video that you would send to me, Kathryn, and then that's how I would get my video intake, it's not me doing it, you're doing it for me,
Yeah. Exactly. There we go. I mean, that's part of RevOps too, work smarter, not harder.
Truth, yeah. Just like once you have like the network effect, it's like people are sending you like the updated stuff in the end. But I think the curiosity also helps too. Being proactive and just searching. Like honestly, it's super basic searches. I don't think you have to do anything crazy, like sign up to every product release newsletter or do everything like just like I am. It's like honestly a quick Google search with a tool you like is enough to usually get you started on like adjacent tools. And even looking at the adjacent tools, it just like cascades out there. It's like a Wikipedia rabbit hole type of thing. You know what I mean? Like you're just going through, you click one article and then just go all the way through. Same thing.
For sure. So I guess, have you noticed any interesting trends lately in terms of GTM tooling and tech stacks? Because you're the number one expert in the world about all of the different tools that are out there. So it's
if I'm thinking about like tech stacks, like it definitely seems to be expanding, if that's like an answer that I can give. Like I used to have a set of like 3 or 4 tools that I used regularly, then like 4 to 6, and like as I progressed through my year, I definitely see that the stack itself is increasing, which I thought was an interesting development. Like I always thought that like there would be much more tool consolidation, all like Rippling, like having a bunch of different features sort of crammed into it. But I actually think like tool proliferation and like micro uses, like this one sends emails, but this one drafts the list for the emails, and like this one pushes it and orchestrates all of your different systems. Like there are tools to orchestrate the different systems that you actually have, to push into Salesforce and use it as a system of record, for example.
So why do you think that is? You're seeing these more kind of niche and specific use cases?
I think they just have like nuanced use cases that previously just weren't available to us generally, like, and it just doesn't make sense. It's not the bread and butter of someone to like pursue. They are sort of like micro use cases, like meeting recordings, for example. Like, yeah, I guess like Gong could have done that for you, like recorded a meeting and just like given you some pointers and tips, and I'm sure people used it for that. But I wouldn't say meeting recording is something that was like top of mind. Like there's a reason that type of tool blew up now, right? Like there's just this niche use case that's so facilitated by AI that it makes it sort of become like an everyday part of your thing. I think those sort of like micro uses that have been enabled by new technology, like Clay is super popular with people that I've seen, like vectors all over the place and that I've like mentioned a couple of times, but like those are tools that like weren't like 100% necessary, but, you know, have sort of, as people have found the value in them, just added them on and taped them onto a tech stack. But I'd argue that they all have some AI element to them in order to like facilitate it. So I think it's kind of led to a bit of a tool sprawl. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe there'll be like another like consolidation in the future, but it's definitely proliferated as a result for the moment.
It makes me think, so from my perspective, I also don't know whether it's good or bad. I think maybe it depends on context. So I'm wondering, are there certain things that you think a company might need to have in place, whether that's like a certain type of data architecture or systems or even a type of role or individual in order to be successful working with a bunch of microsystems?
Yes, I think I would more touch on the role specificity. So it's like I see, and I'm starting to see like an emergence between people who are sort of more like the data orchestrators, like the data engineers of the world, like the people who are managing your Snowflake instance and the people who are like a little bit more heavy financial RevOpsy, you know, the types that are like closer to finance and like quoting and like the actual quote process and like the revenue reconciliations and forecasting and headcount planning. Like those people are seeming to like deviate, like kind of like, you know, grow apart from one another. And then there's like a person that sort of sits in the middle that feels like a new-ish role to me. That's like a GTM systems person. It's not like a completely novel concept, right? Like systems people have existed forever, but I think their scope is starting to grow, and it's not just the traditional like, oh, I'm your Salesforce admin type of guy, you know. It's like someone who's managing all of those micro systems that I was alluding to, like, and actually connecting them like with the revenue operations person and the data engineer in order to orchestrate it more succinctly. So that's kind of like the emergent role that I would be aware of, that like there is this person that sits and is like pretty technical but isn't quite a data engineer and is like, you know, pretty connected to revenue operations, and that the processes they design, like, you know, impact revenue directly, but isn't quite like the finance type of revenue operations person. So I think that intermediary sort of role is becoming more emergent and necessary for like a lot of growing companies, especially as like this tool proliferation comes and, you know, keeps going.
Have you heard of the term GTM engineer?
No. Honestly, like, I'm actually surprised that I haven't. Like you got me.
Less time on LinkedIn than I do, which is probably a good thing. Yeah, it made me think that might be what you're describing. There's kind of a debate going on around whether, you know, GTM engineer is a fad or actually a new role, or it's just a rebrand of something that already exists. And from what I know, that sounds very similar to what you're describing. It sounds like your perspective is that it is an emergent role, maybe not entirely new and novel, but emerging to sort of meet new demands of like the GTM tech space.
Totally. Like, I think revenue operators in particular, like, used to be able to sort of cover the systems perspective. I think it was generally like just pretty well known that a revenue operations person is like your de facto Salesforce administrator to like at least a limited extent. Mm-hmm. But now I'm sort of seeing as like, you know, all these third-party integrations are like porting and synthesizing data into like into your CRM, like these people are getting sort of like overwhelmed and causing, you know, this sort of differentiation. Like, I've even seen it like when I was working within Rippling, like I myself started moving more toward like the tooling technical aspect side and doing less and less of like the forecasting, like things I would traditionally associate with like revenue operations, right? So like I think that natural drift actually is creating like a new sort of role that exists sort of between like the traditional data engineers of the world and like more streamlined revenue operations folk, if that's the right term. Like, I don't know if that's it for sure. Just my take.
Yeah. I think it's something that we're going to see developing over the next months, years. Okay, Max, are you much of a reader? Are you a podcast?
Yeah, I would say I definitely dabble in both. Like, I'm definitely reading a good one right now.
Do you read to learn work-wise, or is it entirely non-work related?
It's like work adjacent. Like, I don't know. I like nonfiction in particular. So it's like if I can get something that's, like, I think a home run type of book for me is something where I learn something like that's related to my field, but like also just completely unrelated, like that is like my favorite type of thing. Like, I'm reading Nexus right now, by Yuval Noah Harari. Like, I think it's like he's the guy that came out with like Sapiens and like Homo Deus, like that type of book.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a great one.
I was doing a reading challenge last year. I did one of those like Goodreads challenges. I read 30 books, which I'm proud of, but it was a bit too much, and so I'm taking a bit of a break now. For people who do enjoy reading, other than Nexus, are there any books that you would recommend? They don't have to be specifically about RevOps, like you said. Kind of like the most interesting things we learn are adjacent to a certain topic.
Yeah, man, that's a really good one. Sheesh, Kathryn, I might have to get back to you on that one. I'm going to spend too much time thinking about like what the right answer is, but if I can shoot you one afterwards, I definitely will.
For sure. Okay, well, I think we're almost at time, so I'll just give you a quick one to kind of wrap things up. For somebody who's thinking about getting into revenue operations or GTM systems, what would be your top piece of advice to that person?
For someone who's looking to get into revenue operations, what would be my top piece of advice? I would say do things. Like, actually push things to production. Like, go screw around in Salesforce. Like, go actually, like, piss someone off, like make someone angry. Like, this is probably horrible advice for like most people, but I found that like that is the right way to like get involved. Like, someone will pay attention if you break something, okay? If you're asking for a project constantly and saying, hey, can I get on this? Like, can I make this happen? Like, I'm not saying go and like RMRF your database and like, like destroy the entire thing, but like go push something in Salesforce. Like, go make a flow. Like, go, like, if you're looking at like a process improvement, like make it happen. Like, find a tool that's on there and like ask if, like, present a use case and actually see if a tool like that would work. Like, I've basically just done that for years over and over and asked questions that I'm sure people like are thinking about asking but not asking, and then it's just leading to like more and more success. So that's exactly what I would recommend to like break into it. Or if you're interested, just like start screwing around and like piss off your revenue operations person.
You heard it from the source. Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure chatting to you as always. Never know what direction the conversation is going to go. So thank you so much. And to everybody who's listened and joined us today, appreciate your time too. We'll link to Max's LinkedIn below so that you can send him a message and tell him how great his advice was.
Thanks, Kathryn.